This video is kindly sponsored by Conflict of Nations, the free online military-themed PvP strategy game. Hey, 42 here. We all love a good prank. There's nothing quite like physically and psychologically torturing the people we love the most for a light bit of entertainment. Cling film over the toilet seat, the perfect jump scare that sends your girlfriend into a cardiac arrest, impersonating an African prince to infiltrate a British warship with one of England's most famous female authors dressed as a man. Wait, what? Pranking is a thoroughly modern phenomenon, born out of social media and the proliferation of the smartphone. In the Victorian era, when men were chivalrous and gallant, and women were elegant, charming, and mercilessly repressed, people were far too sensible for anything as petty as pranking. Or were they? Because, as it happens, the greatest prankster ever to have lived isn't some millennial with an iPhone and 50 million YouTube subscribers. He was a member of Britain's social elite who was born almost 150 years ago. Do you have what it takes to lead a nation, rally an army, and ultimately dominate the world? Well, now you can put your strategic combat skills to the test by choosing a real country to lead in modern global warfare. It's all down to your strategy and how you take command. Will you declare war on your neighbours, or forge alliances with other players in order to overcome all 128 players in real time in games that can take weeks to complete? My favourite part of Conflict of Nations is the incredible attention to detail in the beautifully designed maps, and the PvP battles are always fun. Conflict of Nations is available across PC and mobile. You can even play on the same account on both devices. To start you off on your road to global domination, you can now get an exclusive gift. All you have to do is click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer's only available for 30 days, so hurry. On paper, Horace de VERE Cole to his friends, isn't an obvious candidate for the world's most brilliant prankster. He's a bit more Downton Abbey than trigger-happy TV, if you see what I mean. For starters, he came from a wealthy and influential family who were so well-connected, they made the Rothschilds look like the Simpsons. Cole's father was a major in the British Army, his mother was an heiress related to the Earl of Oxford, his uncle would go on to become the Governor of the Bank of England, and his sister married future Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. In keeping with his upbringing, Cole was educated first at Eton, the fanciest of fancy pants schools in England, and then Cambridge, one of the most revered universities in the world. And yet, for all this pomp and circumstance, Horace de VERE Cole cared about one thing and one thing only: pranking the living crap out of everything that moved. His first major stunt took place when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge in 1905. Whilst browsing the paper one morning, he noticed that the Sultan of Zanzibar would soon be visiting London on official business. To any other student, that would have been a mildly interesting news article. But to Horace de VERE Cole, it was an opportunity. After hastily putting together a plan, he sent a telegram to the mayor of Cambridge claiming that the Sultan's uncle was planning on visiting the city the following week. After recruiting his best friend, Adrian Stephen, and a couple of other willing accomplices, Cole then took a trip to a renowned theatrical costume maker, Willie Clarkson, who darkened their skin with makeup and kitted them out in what they assumed a Zanzibar prince's uncle and his entourage might wear. Incidentally, Willie Clarkson is famous for making disguises both for Scotland Yard and for many of London's most notorious criminals. Some also believe he may have been Jack the Ripper, but that's a story for another video. It says a lot about the era that Cole thought blackface and some theatre costumes would be enough to fool anyone into believing him and his friends were actually African royalty. But it says even more about the era that the disguises worked a treat. Not only did an official delegation, including the mayor of Cambridge himself, take the group around the city, the students were even given a private tour of the very same university they were attending at the time. Rumour has it not even their own friends and professors recognised them. Perhaps because of his own grandiose upbringing, Cole hated pomposity and arrogance in all its forms, which is why he made it his unofficial mission in life to bring some of Britain's most important people down a peg or two. In perhaps his most famous takedown of a public figure, Cole challenged his one-time school friend from his Eton days, Conservative MP Oliver Locker-Lamson, to a good old-fashioned foot race down a London street. Apparently confident in his sprinting ability, Cole even offered to give Locker-Lamson a 10-yard head start. I can only assume Locker-Lamson wasn't aware of Cole's reputation as prank master general at this point, because he foolishly took up the challenge, streaking out in front to make the most of his head start. But before Locker-Lamson could begin to celebrate a certain victory, a voice called out behind him, "Stop, thief!" And before he knew what was happening, he'd been tackled to the ground by a passing policeman. Locker-Lamson was furious, but that fury soon turned to disbelief when the policeman asked him to turn out his pockets, and Horace de VERE Cole's solid gold pocket watch, sneakily planted before the race by Cole himself, tumbled to the floor. As far as pranks go, framing an innocent member of parliament for a criminal offence is pretty brutal, but Cole did eventually admit he'd set the whole thing up for a lark, and Locker-Lamson was released without charge. Not all of Cole's pranks were aimed at authority figures. Sometimes he just wanted to watch the world burn. In one of his most outrageous escapades, he and a group of friends dressed up as workmen and closed off Piccadilly Circus with barriers. Not content to simply disrupt the traffic at one of London's busiest and most prestigious junctions, and possibly in order to make the whole thing look a bit more legit, Cole and his friends proceeded to start digging trenches in the road at random. The prank was so convincing that local police even lent a hand in redirecting traffic. Along with his signature brand of undermining authority figures and sowing general anarchy wherever he went, Cole wasn't afraid of a little scandal either. He once strolled the streets of London with the teat from a cow's udder hanging out of his trouser fly, resembling, well, I'll leave that up to your imagination. When a suitably large and angry crowd had gathered around, berating him for indecency and threatening to call the police, Cole pulled out a pair of scissors, smiled a wide, mischievous smile, and cut the udder clean off. They say the ensuing screams could be heard halfway across the capital. Historical opinion seems to be divided on how we should view Horace de VERE Cole. Some see him as an immature toff with too much time on his hands who didn't care who he hurt in the pursuit of a cheap laugh. Others see him as something of a hero, a man brave enough to recognise and mock the absurdity of the privilege he was born into. Whichever side you come down on, it's hard to deny, the man had a certain style. Before the opening night of one of London's poshest West End shows, he arrived early and began giving out tickets for free outside. But there was a catch. He would only give his complimentary tickets to bald men who would agree to one strange condition. What exactly that condition was didn't become clear until later that night. Cole had only given tickets to men who agreed to have a single letter written on their heads, meaning the wealthiest patrons in the expensive upper tiers were treated to the word bollocks, spelt out on strategically placed bald heads below them when the lights came up at the end of the show. Cole pulled off perhaps hundreds of pranks during his lifetime, but today he's known for one above all others, the Dreadnought hoax. It started with a request. One of Cole's friends was in the Navy, and he wanted Cole to put his prodigious pranking powers to use, to get one over on the officers on a ship called HMS Dreadnought, a ship that just so happens to be by far the most advanced vehicle of war on planet Earth at the time. So, How do you go about pranking the officers in charge of the world's greatest warship? I mean, it's not like you can just stroll on board a heavily armed military vessel whenever you feel like it. Well, not unless you're Horace de Vere Cole. For the crowning prank of his career, Cole drew on earlier experience, particularly his infamous prank at Cambridge, involving the Sultan of Zanzibar's uncle. There were no convenient visits from any foreign royals planned, so Cole made one up. It was about time the Prince of Abyssinia, which is today Ethiopia, visited England. Once again, Cole drew on his friends to make the prank more convincing. There were 6 of them in total, mostly drawn from what would become known as the Bloomsbury Group, a collection of esteemed English writers, artists, intellectuals, and philosophers who used to hang out in Bloomsbury, London. Among those roped in for the Dreadnought hoax were Adrian Stephen, Cole's partner in crime for the Cambridge prank, Stephen's sister, Virginia, who you may know by her married name, Virginia Woolf, and the artist Duncan Grant. Once again, Cole kicked things off with a telegram, this time to the Commander-in-Chief of Britain's entire home fleet, announcing the imminent arrival of several Abyssinian princes who were keen to take a look at HMS Dreadnought. In preparation for the big day, Cole paid a visit to his old mate and costumier, Willie Clarkson, the Ripper, to suitably kit his friends out in princely robes and blackface. In case you're wondering, the handsome chap with a beard on the left is legendary author Virginia Woolf. On the appointed day, Cole and his friends went to Paddington Station in London, where Cole, claiming to be a member of the British Foreign Office, demanded that a train be made ready to take Abyssinian royals to Weymouth, where HMS Dreadnought was stationed. It's testament to Cole's impressive powers of persuasion, as well as how deeply entrenched class roles were at the turn of the 20th century, that the station master at Paddington complied at once, ordering that an opulent private train be readied for the prince's journey south. Once again, the theatre garb and simple makeup worked wonders. When the friends arrived in Weymouth, they were treated with all the reverence their royal blood demanded. They were welcomed aboard HMS Dreadnought to a full guard of honour before being given an extensive private tour of the British Navy's most prized asset. To make things more convincing, the group had even invented their own nonsense language, drawn from a Swahili phrasebook they'd studied on the train, mixed with Latin and Greek phrases they remembered from university. All of which meant that, in a scene so ridiculous it's hard to believe it actually happened, a famous prankster, one of the most important English writers of all time, a renowned artist, and several of their semi-famous friends were taken around the British Navy's most dangerous warship wearing fake beards and theatre costumes, spouting utter gibberish to one another. Amongst the nonsense, one of their phrases really caught on, and the group could be heard muttering "bunga bunga" in excited tones whenever they were shown something particularly impressive. To make the whole farce even more ridiculous, it turns out one of the senior officers on the Dreadnought was Commander Willie Fisher, who happened to be Virginia and Adrian's cousin. Despite personally showing them round the warship for several hours, at no point did Commander Fisher recognise 2 members of his own family, one of whom was a woman wearing a fake beard. The whole plan nearly came undone more than once. At one point it began to drizzle, and Cole, who was dressed in his own clothes and playing the role of translator, was forced to make an excuse to get the group below deck before their crude makeup began to run. They were also offered a lavish meal, but figuring the fake beards wouldn't stand up to prolonged chewing, Cole hastily explains that the Abyssinians were only able to eat food that had been specially prepared to certain obscure religious standards. Ultimately, the group got through it unscathed, and it wasn't until the story of the hoax appeared in the Daily Mail a couple of days later that the Navy had any idea they'd been duped. Of course, this time things were a little more serious. Cole hadn't embarrassed some little-known city mayor or MP. He'd metaphorically pulled the pants down on the entire British Navy. And if there's one thing sailors don't like, it's having their pants pulled down. At least not metaphorically. Understandably, senior figures in the Navy were keen to have Cole and his accomplices arrested. But despite their antics, the group hadn't actually broken any laws, and so no conviction was possible. Instead, in what might just have been the most British punishment ever dished out, the hoaxers were subjected to a symbolic thrashing of the buttocks by Royal Navy officers. Virginia Woolf was the only one who was spared a spanking. For all his brilliance as a prankster, Cole wasn't quite so gifted when it came to the important things in life, like his actual life. His first wife left him after he managed to lose his entire fortune in a doomed real estate venture. And though his second wife did give Cole a son, it turned out the child wasn't actually Cole's, but one of his close friends, a painter by the name of Augustus John. Yeah, how's that for a prank? Cole would die at the relatively young age of 55 of a heart attack. As for HMS Dreadnought, pride of the British fleet, in 1915, she became the first and only warship to ram and sink a German submarine during the First World War. The Navy received a deluge of congratulatory telegrams for this remarkable achievement. But perhaps the first one to arrive sums the feat and this whole story up the best. It simply read, Bunga Bunga. Thanks for watching. Conflict of Nations is a free online PvP strategy game happening in a modern global warfare setting. So, if you're ready to choose your own strategy and engage in epic battles, then download Conflict of Nations now. It's free to play, and right now you can get an exclusive gift by clicking on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. This offer is only available for 30 days, so don't miss out.